Welcome to ancient Greece. The time period is around 900 or so BCE, and it goes on until their height really kind of ended at about 300 BCE, but they were still around afterwards, but not nearly as together, and they were overtaken by the Romans, of course. The Greece actually at this time period comprised of over 1,000 independent city-states. 10 of which were the most powerful, approximately 10 were. But each had its own governing system, its own system of laws. It looked after its own city-state people. So it was completely independent of each other. And they only really kind of joined forces when they had to fight off a major enemy like the Persians. This was the society that extolled the idea and the philosophy of humanism. Man is the measure of all things. That's the quote from Protagoras. So that they extolled was the beauty of the human body, or the possibility of the human body. Human needs were important. That the possibility of human endeavor and thought should be valued, and that really man and his concerns were a little bit more important than maybe so totally focusing in on the spiritual or the divine. Okay? And when you value man and his ideas and his thoughts and his being, you come up with sort of a political thing called democracy. And the Greeks are going to invent it. Well, a form of it. Okay? It was limited, and it was limited only to wealthy men and landowners, but it was there. So that's when you value somebody's ideas and themselves, a person, then they ought to have some say in how they govern their lives. And so that's where that idea sort of sprang forth from. They applied lots of mathematics and geometry to all of their art, sculptural and architectural especially. In the early period of Greece, they were trading heavily, of course, at this time with the Middle East. And this is what led to what they call the Oriental or geometric period of early Greece, when they're taking a lot of inspiration from Mesopotamia, Syria, the Middle East, okay? That's called a meander there on that lower left. That's was invented here, that sort of design and that sort of pattern. It's very popular even today. The earliest period is called the Archaic period and of ancient Greece, around 600 BCE, 500 BCE. So let's take a look at how some of their artwork looked. We're going to start with Greek vase painting. The earliest type of Greek vase painting is called black figure painting. Okay, and that's what's seen on the left here. Black figures on a red terracotta ground. And what that means is, how that's done very simply, is that you paint slip, which is a very thinned out clay, almost like, looks like a paint, but it's really painting with sort of like mud, all right, but very thin mud. And you paint it on the surface, and you take a carving knife or needle or tool, and you carve into it, scraping into that slip, and then you put it into the fire to fire. And whatever has been painted with that clay slip, that very thin mud, turns black. So that's why the figures were painted on with the slip and then carved into, and the red you see behind them is simply the raw clay, the terracotta itself that's unglazed. Okay. On the right, you see red figure pottery. And this is the reverse. You paint the slip or the mud, the very thin mud, on the background. And then you can paint lines very thinly and all sorts of details into the figures themselves. Then you put it in the fire to fire, and whatever is painted with the black slip, of course, is black. The clay, excuse me. That is all what is in the background. The red figure pottery allowed for more freedom and more control on how the figures were presented. It made them look more naturalistic. We get three-quarter views in red figure paintings with figures, which is not seen before in art. We get a lot more, oh, they look more natural and less stiff. Ezechias is, Ezechias is considered to be the master of black figure painting. He's actually telling a tale here of these two warriors playing a game of dice, and it's a lovely representation of black figure. We have a little scene being told here. There's no hierarchical scale here, meaning we're not seeing the large king and then the small peons or any of that kind of thing. This is just telling us a story or a simple enjoyment of these two warriors playing a game together. That's it. This is Euripides, and his is considered to be the master of red figure pottery. Notice the three-quarter view of the center figure, and even on the right a little bit. That would never be able to be achieved until they had red figure pottery. It's almost like there's a little bit of foreshortening. We'll talk about foreshortening in class so you can see it, what it is, okay? They actually look, the figures actually look, they're actually living in some sort of space, some sort of depth is achieved in this. Sculpture. Early sculpture took a lot of inspiration from Egypt, hence the look of this Kore. Okay, she's a woman or a goddess. She's a female statue. Okay, and Greek statues were painted, believe it, with encaustic paint, which is a wax paint, except for the skin. That would have been left the natural stone color. She's got the sort of a little bit of a smile on her mouth, closed mouth. That's called the archaic smile from this time period. Archaic. We're going to see some more of that recently. But that smile was added to make her look more human. Okay, but she still is very stiff, very stylized. She's just basically a big sort of tube here with this very long arm and the very long fingers and the patterning of the hair. So she doesn't really look. She's very stiff. Okay. Here is the Koros. The Koros are male youth sculptures that are nude. And the hair would have been painted on these, but nothing else. Everything else would have been the natural stone color. But you'll notice on the left with the earlier piece from the archaic period, he's got the smile on his face. He's also, if you look at the legs, it almost looks like the legs from ancient Egypt on the pharaoh's sculptures. And that's a direct use of that. The sculptor was meaning to do that, okay? But you'll notice something else, that this figure is freestanding. I mean, it has been liberated from that back block of stone that all Egyptian statues are attached to. So he's trying to make this youth look like he's a little bit more freestanding and a little bit more alive. Okay. And on the right, we've got a slightly older piece. Here, the muscles are more defined and more natural, although he seems a little plump in the hip area for my taste, for a perfect male youth. These are not portraits of particular men. They're just like a ideal. Okay. But we have him looking more natural, a little less stiff. His hands and his arms look like they bend a little bit more naturalistically. But he's still got that kind of, well, I kind of think the archaic smile looks a little silly on him. But, you know, these smiles that are meant to make them look lifelike. And here they are again, these two dying warriors. But notice how the portrayal of the figure is much more dynamic. They're falling, they're dying, they're twisting. even though they still have got this smile. He's dying, but he's got that smile on his face. I think that's funny. But they are much more realistic in the way that they are physically portrayed. Early Greek architecture is definitely driven by the idea of proportion and geometry. You'll need to know these terms, stylobate and shaft and caryatids, and we'll go over each one of these in class. And you just know right now that the stylobate is the floor of the temple, essentially. That's very simple. And the cella is the interior biggest room that would have housed the deity that the temple was built to honor. Okay. There's the floor plan from above, sort of the scheme. You'll see the cella there and the colonnade around the outside, the stylobate where everybody sits down. There are three orders or three styles of Greek columns. Here you do want to know these terms. The Doric, the Ionic, and the Corinthian. I will not be holding you to all of these terms that are listed on this drawing, so just take a deep breath. But I wanted you to see the difference in the shaft of the column. That's the tall part, you know, that's where it's all kind of got the ribs and everything. That's the main part of the column. Notice how in the Doric order, it's quite thick on the shaft, and it gets slimmer and slimmer. So the Doric order column, it's the plain Jane. You notice the capital up here at the top. You'll see those drawings on the lower right. It's very plain. There's no real decoration there. Okay. And the column shaft is very thick. This is the workhorse of ancient Greek architecture. This is the guy that's going to hold up the most weight. Almost all the buildings in Washington, D.C. that have this type of architecture, Greek architecture, has got this Doric order to it. It's very heavy buildings. It's meant to look super solid, super permanent, and super strong. The middle one is the Ionic. It's got the volutes. Those sort of scroll work at the very top of the capital on either side. Slightly slimmer column. It's still supportive, but it's meant to be a little bit more decorative. This column is used in architecture even today. And on the very far right, we see the Corinthian order, and that's the most decorative column. It's got the slimmest shaft. It's got the acanthus leaves and volutes and all those three different tiers worth of decoration. That's really meant to be the highly decorative column.